Welcome back to another episode of the Rise Overrun Podcast. My name is Doug Barnett. This is my co-founder, Brandt.
What's up?
And today, we're going to talk about how we use AI, both personally and professionally. So why don't I kick us off here and just specifically talk a little bit about how I use AI as a startup CEO. There's actually like a lot of different use cases that I will go leverage, but primarily what I'm trying to figure out in the stage of company that we're at is getting a general consensus or knowledge base around what other companies in our stages are struggling with, how they solve those things. And that's everything from hiring to management, team organization. There's a lot of writing on this stuff as a general knowledge base for AI to pull from. Generally, it is very, very good at basically distilling things down into like bullet points of like, these are the core things that other companies at your stage are working on. So that would be one. Two, sometimes I will riff with it on ideas that I have about company structure. And I'll give one example. We're trying to figure out what to do with HR. Mm-hmm. And I will riff with it on, well, what if we did this as it relates to compliance and used this type of person to work on this? Or should I just layer it all under this organization? And it's quite good at like giving me ideas and things to leverage in how I think about it. So that'll be second one. The third one is I want to understand a lot of information about public companies. And now I can dump a 10K from a public company into any of the models and get incredible. I can basically say like, here's this 250-page document. Don't do anything with it yet. I'm just going to upload it, and then I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions from the document. And it didn't used to be very good. Now it's excellent at this. And I don't have to read these documents anymore. I can distill information that I want, like nearly instantly on the key drivers that I want. And let me just give you some examples of what that can look like. Everything from, when did this company in their transition away from hyper growth into cash flow generating? Or what is the forward-looking multiple on free cash flow for these types of companies? And it can distill that information very quickly. So to set another way, it's almost like a very, very good research assistant at my side.
Yeah, I think for me, like summarization and then quick understanding on topics that I maybe don't have, deep context on are loosely how I would use it as well. And maybe like a third area of writing some amounts of code. As a leader, you're constantly trying to figure out how to understand more and more, like span across an entire company and have like a sense-making apparatus of sorts. And I think traditionally you rely on people like analysts to go like compile data for you. You'll rely on, assistants that will like take notes or whatever. We're starting to have tooling now. Like I think one awesome one has been our sales summarization data that we get. And every day it just says like, here's how all the calls went, here's what could be better, and here's, what went well. And that like summary data that gets compiled up is super helpful. Like for me as trying to make sense of the business. And we're starting to put that on top of like how code gets written. We have this bot now that does the same thing, looks for common mistakes and areas for opportunity to train better, things like that. And I'd suspect that we start to put some of this on top of like our broader data set to have it do natural analyses of sorts. The sort of like research assistant side from me as a CTO, last night, we're working on this big launch right now that fundamentally reworks how like our whole system.
Basically workflow management.
Yeah, it's workflow management, Like, how do you have a bunch of tasks that are conditional and some rely on each other, and you need to have like versions of the task flow, and that they all need to work in parallel? It's really complicated. I can actually put all that into something like ChatGPT and give it some pretty specific parameters about how I want it to make sense of the things. Like I give it our tech stack that we work with. And then it just starts spitting out database structures. And I've built enough of these things to know where it's, making stupid decisions and give it little corrections here and there. But same type of thing where I can riff back and forth in my bed about a complicated database structure and kind of get to some like interesting conclusions.
Does it have unique insights occasionally that you're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. That's really smart.
Yeah, if I give it the right prompts, like how do other companies handle something like, or how does this specific company that I know has this feature handle this type of thing? Sometimes you have to give it a little bit of help there, but in this particular case, I walked away with like a vision of how this could be that is, I feel confident in. It's going to be better.
And is it different than when you started the kind of the research project with it? Or did it just confirm what you were already thinking? Or did you come out with a new paradigm?
No, new paradigms for sure. So that's helpful. Basically replacing like bouncing ideas off of like a somewhat senior engineer.
Yep.
Like when we're trying to go understand things about like the roofing industry, for example, it's really helpful to kind of get like a lay of the land, so to speak. I don't think it's going to replace, for me, someone like Travis in our company who has all these years of actual roofing knowledge, but it gives me at least like the topics that I kind of need to go then dive deeper into, and makes me feel like I'm not operating in complete darkness. So I think there's, that's like the first two topics I use AI for. Like the last one in terms of like actual coding, I think it's reasonably good if you're starting something new or you want to prototype. So you're kind of working in like a vacuum or an isolated environment to say like, give me the scaffolding of this type of app. Like if you were to go put in like make me a to-do list into Cursor or ChatGPT or whatever, it gives you a pretty good thing. When you want to start to like add stuff to it, it falls apart pretty quickly. I think maybe some limitation with context window or something going on there. But it helps me like, but like once again, kind of prototype and reason through ideas like in a vacuum or in a sandbox. I find it a little less useful when it's understanding like some pre-existing context about our code base and making recommendations about what to do on top of it.
Well, that was the question I wanted to ask you, is like if I took a section of code,
yeah,
I specifically gave it the prompt, what would you do to this code base? And let's say it's not that significant. Let's say it's a couple hundred lines of code. What would you do with this to make it easier for the next person that doesn't work here today to understand and to more succinctly write these lines of code? Do you think it would do a good job with that?
It gives I would say it's maybe like 70% hit rate on useful suggestions there. I actually will do that from time to time. And it still can live a bit in the like overly generic land of ideas where you're just like, that's not helpful to anybody. I think where it crosses over the line of not being helpful is if you were to say something more like, we have a form here and I want you to add like a conditional piece of logic that if someone like clicks this checkbox, that it then like takes you to a different step of the form, like create a like bi-directional form. It gets lost a little bit.
What I'm wondering here, specifically on coding, is the model's now using like test time compute, where it's like, okay, if you wanted to deliver a fast answer on something, it's going to make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
But if you give it an hour to think and like reason its way through the problem sets, is there a scenario over the next 3 to 6 months where, given that condition, and enough time to think, and it knows like what a great outcome looks like, but it didn't quite get there quickly, but could over time, it feels like these models could become better at actually getting on the coding side much closer to the things that you're seeking.
I think they will get better for sure. And I think there's like, this is a case where there's a lot of data sitting there to go train off of. And also similar in a way to Tesla, where like once you're using the model, it's being like constantly tuned and trained in a useful way. I do think though, in a lot of cases, you want deterministic outcomes, meaning 100% of the time, you expect that if you are kind of wanting a certain component or a way of writing a piece of code, that it will always do that thing. And it's still in its current form going to be probabilistic, meaning it will kind of choose what it thinks is the most likely option. And when you're talking about code, you really have like all of these different building blocks sitting on top of each other. Even for something simple, you might have like 300 different kind of blocks that all compose together and create, an app or create a website or whatever. If the probability is wrong in connecting any one of those two things, the whole thing breaks. I mean, literally, your app in a lot of cases just has an error message that pops up. And that's kind of what I've been running into with like agents in coding, or even having some of these, cursor or Copilot things build an app. It doesn't connect the dots in the right way. And I think it has a long way to go there.
Relative to the general populace, where would you put us as individual AI users as far as like how often we're using AI?
Like top,
95th, 99th?
Yeah.
High usage, personally. What are some of the ways that you're using it today?
The most useful for me are a couple things. So I think if I'm trying to get advice or kind of have like a sounding board of sorts on, a whole bunch of different topics, I go to AI quite a lot. So, even just kind of trying to reason through some of my ideas about these topics we're talking about, I'll get on my phone and get on the voice chat aspect of ChatGPT and just talk to it back and forth while I'm driving. And it's now like good enough where you can interrupt it. You can kind of just talk to it almost like a person. And it like, gives you pretty concise answers back. So you're not listening to some like big, long, huge paragraph back every time. Anyways, I think like quickly running through thought experiments that would otherwise take me a lot of Googling and research. Certain research projects I think are also interesting. I have actually like removed myself from Twitter and like all kinds of social networks, and kind of opted to use like Google's Gemini research as sort of like a deep research as a one of the stopgaps. And like I can go ask it like what's been happening in the world and this topic, and it'll go read 80 different websites and give me a summary. And I think like at Remy, we use AI for like quick prototyping. Like we'll get in, it can be like me, a product manager and a designer in a room, and we're trying to make sense of like how we do complicated task management in our app. What are the different models by which companies do this when it comes to like visual design and database schemas and like code logic? Like how do people think about this? And it'll give you tons of options.
Yeah.
And then we get to kind of decide how to put it together. And that's kind of like the key for me. If I need deterministic outcomes, I will never rely on the current AI tooling. And I think that they're a long way away from solving that. But if it's probabilistic...
Can you define what deterministic outcomes mean?
Yeah, like when you're running a business and you're trying to build an automation, you want to have confidence that when user press button, the same thing always happens every time. And if it's like, oh, it's going to happen 98% of the time, it's not good enough. If there was a 2% chance that we were going to lose like $10,000 on one of our transactions because we're using an AI model, we're not doing it.
We're not.
And that's essentially what I think you're signing up for in the aggregate when you're thinking about using things like agents. Like you have a probability at each step of a workflow that the thing might happen.
98% probability.
Yeah.
And at some point, if it actually took a wrong turn, it doesn't correct it immediately. It just keeps going down the wrong path, and you end up at a very different place than where you want to end up.
Yeah.
And those things are really hard to plan for or to build against right now.
Yeah, and like it, the conversation goes something like this. It's like, okay, well, it'll get better and better. Or you just need to like go build guardrails around your model and like figure out all the edge cases. At that point, why am I not just writing a deterministic code flow? It's way easier.
What about with ASI? Like if you have something that's like super intelligent, can it figure it out?
I don't think that they will ever get to the level of, I don't say ever. I think they're a long way away from getting to the point where it is good enough. Think about this like example where like, would you be willing to potentially lose $10,000 on every one of our jobs?
Well, let's just put it through the lens of Stripe.
Yeah.
How many nines does Stripe have on how accurate they have to be? It's something like five or six nines, which is 99.999 or 99.9999. That is very different from 98.
Yeah. And 98 is just a number I'm sort of making up.
Yeah.
I think the actual, number, if I was putting, doing it anecdotally from what I've seen, it's probably like 80 at best.
So actually, let's just dig on this just for a second. Let's use an operations person at a company or a salesperson at a company. What could they use AI for today that's like an effective use?
I think the best use case generally is like summarization.
Basically, a very great version of a library.
Or a note taker,
Yep.
like someone that, can tell you what happened on a call, someone that can make sense of 100 calls at once even and say like, here's the thematic elements, here's the sentiment, here's some things that the salespeople need to work on, like doing analysis of that type that does not need to be deterministic. It's an opinion.
What about a salesperson, an AI salesperson that doesn't necessarily have to like get an outcome, but they just have to make a sale?
I think if you're talking about like very simple sales, maybe. I still kind of get a little squeamish with it because if it's an LLM, like LLMs by nature are sort of like, let me handle 10 million different prompts in a library. And so we are running into weird scenarios with AI chatbots or voice-powered salespeople where, people are kind of like going off of the script and throwing edge cases into this thing, and they're, asking for discounts or they're asking for, alternative products that the company doesn't even offer, and these like AI bots will go along with it.
Okay, I'm gonna pitch you something to try to change your mind. We both drive Teslas.
Mm-hmm.
A year ago, I think it was on, FSD was like on, I think 11. It's now on V13.
Yeah.
The rate of improvement in the last 12 months is actually mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
The product was scary a year ago.
Yeah.
Not scary anymore at all. And the outcomes of driving are quite deterministic. There are very specific things you can and cannot do.
Yeah.
Places that you can and cannot go. And it's pretty darn good at basically, I don't know what the nines would be right now. Maybe it's just 2 nines. Maybe it's 3 nines. but it's approaching a level that is quite close to what we would call like this 5-9 stripe. And the way they measure this is on incidents per X.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if the last information that I've heard is by middle of this year, they expect the models to be able to be at an incident per about 300,000 drives, which is the level of a human.
Yeah.
Well, if you can do it in a Tesla with something as complex as driving, why can't the models be tuned to be able to do it with salespeople?
I mean, I think there's a couple things. One, like if you're looking at an LLM, it's like a fundamentally different sort of AI technology.
Yep.
Like it's trained on the entire human language and thus meant to react to any amount of the human language. And so the amount of possibilities that you have to go put guardrails around are huge. I think it's just like a poor technology to like build around in that sense if you're trying to have like very small, narrow, deterministic outcomes.
Yep.
I think the other difference is like if you look at driving, you have a predefined set of rules that already exist out there that you're just trying to get now this machine or AI to adhere to. That doesn't really exist in sales. Like you can't, there's no lines on the road in sales. There's no stop
There's no
lights,
maps.
There's no maps. Like it's, I think driving is like a very unique set of data to go make sense of because all of that exists. Now, most things in business or like, outside of driving, I just don't think that rule set is really there. So trying to come up with all of the edge cases essentially, and either build the guardrails into the model or get it to somehow discern those things still feels like very unsolved for a lot of the AI companies that we're seeing.
You know what I was thinking about? And this is a little bit off topic, but it is connected to this driving thing. It feels like pilots should be replaced before drivers. Like
airplane.
Yeah, like airplane pilots.
Totally, yeah.
Because that's an even narrower set of things that you need to teach, learn. It's already like hyper narrow in the use cases. And I'm like, there's no such thing as a drowsy AI pilot. It can take in all of the wind and weather and all those determinations as part of it. Feels like we should have autonomous planes, passenger planes, like soon.
Yeah, and I think they've had, like less intelligent versions of autopilot for 30 years now, at least.
Yep.
I don't know, I'm just making things up a little bit, but I think that makes sense to me.
I think on BG2, one of the podcasts I listened to, Brad Gerstner challenged some guest. I can't remember what the guest was. It's probably 6 or 8 months ago. And he said, when will the agent that can book travel for you? So you tell the agent, I want to go here on this date, handle it. When will that agent be able to do that? And he put the over-under by the end of 2025. And one of the people took the under and one of them took the over. What are you doing?
I'd be slightly over, but I think that those types of use cases are also like not really that complex to me. In that case, you're not really relying on something like an LLM. You're training a model to kind of understand a much narrower set of things that could happen and to account for, and more or less have to kind of account for the variance in like booking travel website interfaces. And I think that problem set seems reasonable to solve.
What about, this is the one that's probably the most interesting to me personally. What about a model that knows you personally, your family? It knows everything about your life, has your calendar, has all your notes. It has all of your health information. It has your doctors, your everything, all of your interactions with you and your family. Could we have AI real assistants in the same time frame?
I think we're further away from that. Like I think you have like a context window maybe some amount of inference, like limitation there. And I think like a signal here is if you use something like Notion's AI, in theory, it is what you're saying for your whole company. But if you go try and like ask it things, it either sits there and spins or gives you incorrect info. And one area that I am unsure if it will get, super good at in the short term is like, if you asked it like a fact, like, when is my dad's birthday or something like that? And that is stored in like a way that's not, very obvious to a model. Like you don't have it in some text file that's labeled birthdays and it's like dad and then date. I think it'll make up stuff.
I have a story about this. So there's a YC company called Simple AI that is meant to be like a consumer assistant type of AI. It sent me a notification yesterday that a team member of ours had a birthday yesterday. And I was like, is it your birthday? And he started laughing. He's like, no. It was his work anniversary.
Yep.
But the AI didn't know how to like differentiate between, hey, Nate's celebrating his work anniversary at Remy and it's his birthday. And anyway, we got a good chuckle out of that. It's a tiny hallucination, but it's actually like, hey, if I wasn't like sitting pretty close to him and I sent him a text like, hey, happy birthday, he's like, the heck? It's not my birthday.
Yeah, and that's like where there's it's hard to have the right amount of training data on, because if you think about like why LLMs and talking to ChatGPT works, it's because it's trained on like all of the text available to humans. And so when you're trying to do autocomplete about what you think the next words might be, which is what ChatGPT does in a probabilistic sense, there's quite a lot to go off of. But if the amount of data out there that is essentially queries for birthdays on a corpus of data that is, I don't know where it's pulling from, like Google Calendar.
Probably my Gmail. Yeah, my calendar.
There's just not a lot of like connecting the dots there to train a model. Like how many people have done that request?
100% that's where it came from, because I have Rippling's calendar loaded into my calendar.
Yeah.
So I can see work anniversaries and birthdays and time off and all sorts of stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly where it got it from.
Yeah.
And so it's one little data point. It's like, hey, it's Nate's birthday.
Yep.
No, it's not.
Now, if you're talking about an AI assistant that can give you like summaries, opinions, it doesn't need to be deterministic. It's not looking for facts. I mean, I already use some of these, like they have one that's basically a therapist, and I just kind of
talk with it.
And to me, it's more useful than going to a real therapist for a lot of things.
Interesting.
Because I can like noodle down a lot of different ideas really quick, and I'm like, oh, okay, I would have had to stop my therapy session right here and right here and right here and right here. And this was basically like 10 therapy sessions in 10 minutes of talking to this thing. So I think for that stuff, totally.
I was working with ChatGPT last night for like 90 minutes on nutrition, workout, stuff like that. It's way less judgmental than it used to be. It's way less lecture-y. It doesn't lecture me nearly as much. It also doesn't say like, hey, by the way, like I'm giving you this information, you need to talk to a doctor. It doesn't do that nearly as much, and getting quite helpful. And I'm using a lot of the tooling. I use Gemini Deep Research fairly regularly. I use Grok all the time. I don't use Claude nearly as often, even though people tell me it's the best one. For me, still, I think ChatGPT is the most useful on a general day-to-day basis.
Claude's coding is still the best, actually.
That's why I don't use it, yeah. Maybe this is counter to most people's opinions on what's happening with AI. To be clear, we are very big fans and would love if this stuff made radical improvements for the agent kind of takeover to be true. I am not of the opinion that it's going to make everybody lose all of their jobs anytime soon. But it seems to be a ways away still. Thanks for spending some time with us. Listen to us ramble on about AI and crypto, and we will catch you guys on the flip.
See ya.